Hello all and welcome to our literature lecture for the topic of military. For this topic, we read selections from Caesar's The Gallic War and two poems ostensibly about war. Let's first start with Caesar's The Gallic War. Commentarii de Bello Gallico, or Commentaries on the Gallic War, are Julius Caesar's first-hand account of the Gallic Wars. They are written as a third-person narrative and depict the battles and intrigues that took place in the 9 years he spent fighting the Germanic peoples and Celtic peoples in Gaul that opposed Roman conquest. These are not, in the middle of battle notes, but written in the relative tranquility after the events described were safely over. Therefore, they're more appropriately memoirs than they are, battlefield transcripts. These are our only surviving works by Caesar, who wrote many other things beyond these. The style is elegant but simple. However, the simplicity is a ploy. He is intending to portray himself as a straightforward, plain-speaking soldier, far removed from the devious sophistry of political life. Unfortunately, Caesar's Gallic campaigns were little short of genocide. Millions of Gauls were killed. According to Plutarch, when Caesar contravened a truce with the Germans and massacred 300,000 of them, everyone thought that a Thanksgiving should be celebrated, except Cato, who kept urging that he should be handed over to those whom he had wronged so that no pollution should befall Rome. This is playing on the idea that Rome only fought just wars sanctioned by the Senate, and Caesar's war was not just. The Commentarii de Bello Gallico exist in 7 volumes that cover the events from 58 to 52 BCE. In Book 1, he explains his campaign against the Helvetii and gives a pretext for his invasion. In Book 2, he speaks of the defeat of the Belgic tribes. In Book 3, he tells about his campaigns against the maritime tribes, the Veneti and the Aquitani. In Book 4, he speaks of the Germanic incursion into Gaul and his first invasion of Britain, which is the first section that we read. In Book 5, he speaks about his second expedition into Britain, which is the second section we read. And in Books 6 and 7, he writes about the completion of his conquest of Gaul and defeat of his main enemy, Vercingetorix. Caesar himself was an excellent soldier. He could ride at a gallop with both hands tied behind his back, which was a considerable feat because the Romans had no stirrups on their saddles. As a young man, he was captured by pirates who demanded a ransom of 20 talents. He told them once he was ransomed and released, he would come back and crucify them, which he did. As just a junior officer fighting in Greece, he was awarded the civic crown, and after Pharsalus, he met the brother of Cassius, who would be one of the men to kill him, and instead of trying to escape, he demanded that the brother surrender, and he did. First, let's look at Book 4, Chapter 20 of De Bello Gallico. In this, Caesar gives his pretext for invading Britain. He states, nonetheless, it would be a great advantage to him simply to land on the island and observe the kind of people who live there and the localities, harbors, and approaches. This is meant to suggest that he's not there for war, just to learn about the people. In Book 4, Chapter 22, Caesar points out the differences between Romans and those in the wilds of Britain and Gaul. He talks about the Morini and states they made excuses for their strategy of the previous season, on the grounds that it was because they were barbarians and unaccustomed to our ways that they had made war on the Roman people. This is meant to show the difference between Roman civilization and barbarian uncivilization. I just want to make a quick note here on the word barbarians. This is from the Greek word barbaros, which was an onomatopoetic word created to imitate the sound of non-Greek speaking people. It does not have the connotations of the word that we have today, but it is used to point out differences. Remember, Romans spoke Latin. Anyone else said bar, 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 bar. In Book 4, Chapter 30, Caesar highlights the differences between the Romans and the quote-unquote barbarians through talking indirectly about loyalty. He has made a pact with the Britons previously, but they decided to take advantage of the Roman weakness. They had no food and not enough equipment in their crossing of the channel, and thus, he says, they considered it perfect moment to engineer renewal of hostilities, to cut our men off from corn and supplies and prolong the action into winter. He also highlights his own skill at being a general and soldier. He says, even though Caesar had not yet learned of their plans, nonetheless he suspected it would happen, so he began to prepare safeguards for every eventuality. Thus, Caesar is such a good general that he can expect the unexpected. Book 4, Chapter 33 represents one of many ethnographical asides that Caesar puts in his commentaries. In this, he speaks about the way that the Britons fight on chariots and how different it is from the way that Roman fought on chariots. As I mentioned, this is the first example of ethnography in the selections that we read. Ethnography is the scientific description of the customs of individual peoples and cultures. He talks about the extensive training charioteers went through. He said, they provide the flexible mobility of cavalry and the stability of infantry in battle. By means of daily practice and exercises, they ensure that even on the steepest of inclines, they can hold their horses at full gallop, control and turn them swiftly, run along the beam and stand on the yoke, and from there get quickly back to the chariot. This exercise and discipline is almost parallel to that we saw others speaking about the Romans having. Speaking of previously mentioned things, in this chapter 5, section 2, Caesar indirectly mentions the Roman military discipline. Caesar had gone to Rome to check in on things and came back to his troops during the winter. He discovered that thanks to the soldiers' remarkable zeal, and despite a severe shortage of materials, about 600 ships of the kind we described above had been constructed, together with 28 warships. This is a good example of the military discipline we saw demonstrated in Josephus and Polybius in our topic lecture 1. Slide number 9 represents another example of ethnography, as Caesar describes the indigenous inhabitants of Britain. It's an introduction to the peoples before moving on to a specific tribe. He does definitely point out the way that they're incredibly different from the Romans, including the fact that they consider it wrong to eat hare, chicken, or goose, but still look after them for pleasure and amusement. AKA, the Britons kept hares, chickens, and geese as pets. Caesar continues his ethnography of the peoples of Britain by focusing on one tribe, the Kents. In Book 5, Chapter 14, he describes them as the most civilized. Even though, like other Britons, they paint themselves blue to seem more frightening in battle, they have long hair and mustaches and are shaved everywhere else, and they share their wives among 10 to 12 men. This is a picture of a barbarian, quote unquote, found in the Capitoline Museums in Rome. It is called the Dying Gaul. While this is not a Briton, he does have the hair and the mustache and the shaved body of that Caesar describes. Finally, I wanted to bring up a section of Harvey that you read that I did not mention in the topic lecture. It seemed more appropriate to bring up here since it's from Caesar's Gallic Wars. It shows the rivalry between two high-ranking centurions, Lucius Vorenus and Titus Pullo. It is very dramatic. Caesar uses this anecdote to illustrate the courage and bravery of his soldiers. Since his forces had already been humiliated and defeated in previous engagements, he needed to report a success story to Rome that would lift the spirits of the people. The relationship between Vorenus and Pullo started as a competition, but in the end, both were proven to be worthy of the highest praise. They were rivals because they both wanted to be chosen for promotion, but in the end, Caesar was unable to choose between them. This anecdote is also the inspiration for the two main characters of HBO's Rome. Here's the very first scene of Rome inspired by this anecdote.
Get back in formation, you drunken fool! Reform!
Now let's see how the poets under Augustus spoke about war, keeping in mind the reforms that Augustus made to the military and war in general after the Battle of Actium. First up is Horace Odes 35, an ode to the goddess Fortuna, though, as you'll notice when you read, Fortuna is not actually named. This is a literary hymn, not meant for an actual cult worship. The Fortuna, depicted by Horace, is a combination of Roman Fortuna and Greek Tyche, or fate. Fortuna was generally benevolent, and Tyche would like to use her power arbitrarily, which makes the poem more exciting. The main prayer seems to be for the success of Roman armies abroad. However, the emotional weight is in the end, when he prays for the end of civil conflict and the attendant crimes against men and gods. Here we can see the ending prayer. He says, "Shame on our scars, our crimes, our brothers. Our brutal age has shrunk from nothing. We have left no impiety untouched. Our young men have never stayed their hand for fear of the gods, but have polluted every altar. If only you would reforge our blunted swords to use against Massagetai and Arabs." When he says our brutal age has shrunk from nothing, this is referring back to the civil wars, which is brother against brother, father against son, complete reversal of what Romans expected. It also points out how horrible the past years of civil war have been. When he states, if only you would reforge our blunted swords to use against the Massagetai and Arabs, he asks for the swords to be sharpened again, which were blunted, of course, in the previous civil wars. However, these swords would not be used against other Romans, but against foreigners. Our other poem was Propertius' Elegies 1:6. We will be reading much more Propertius in the future, so I'm going to save biography of him for later. Propertius also had Maecenas for his patron, but not for the composition of the first book of poetry from which this poem comes. This first book was known as the Monobiblos, and it's about his tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend Cynthia, who was probably a professional mistress. This poem in question that we read, 1:6, is a recusatio, which is a type of poem that says he is not going to write epic poetry. However, mixed in with this is Propertius also saying, I'm not going to go to war. The first half is an apology and explanation to his friend as to why he can't go, and the second half is a bon voyage and regret that he can't go with him to Asia. So first let's look at lines 5 through 12, which show how dramatic Cynthia is when Propertius talks about leaving. Propertius says, "I'm verbally estopped by a girl embracing me, who often lends her grave pleas cogent color. All night long she protests her passion, and when I leave her, charges the gods with non-existence, alleging she's no longer mine, with menaces of injured girlfriend to ungrateful man. Even for an hour I can't endure this prosecution. Ah, perish all cold-hearted lovers." Cynthia probably had genuine emotions towards Propertius, but as we can see, she's not the easiest to get along with. When Propertius states, "All night long she protests her passion, and when I leave her, charges the gods with non-existence," this is an example of the theatrical tactics that she uses to make sure her boy won't leave her. In addition, when Propertius says, "Even for an hour I can't endure this prosecution," we get the sense that Propertius is being made a fool of, and he knows it. Finally, Propertius, in lines 25 through 30, compares being in love to being a soldier. He states, "Let me, whom fortune wills among the fallen, lay down my life in extreme misconduct. May the willing casualties of love's long service, among whom let me too be buried. By birth I am ill-equipped for glory or for arms. Fate drafted me to this campaigning." When he states, "whom fortune wills among the fallen," he means he has fallen in love, not fallen in war. When he states, "many of the willing casualties in love's long service, among whom let me to be buried," he's stating that he is willingly enduring this war with Cynthia, but is not willing to endure the dangers of war with Tullus. Finally, he ends with, "Fate drafted me for this campaigning." He insists then that it is his fate not to fight in war, but to fight with Cynthia in love.